5 years after the Jasmine Revolution, has life in Tunisia improved since the fall of Ben Ali? Also on today's program, Implementation Day. Is the final stage of the Iran nuclear deal imminent? And in picture this, Jakarta under attack. At least 7 are dead as the Indonesian capital goes into lockdown. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Gaddafi. Exactly 5 years ago today, after weeks of protests, former Tunisian President Zine el-Abidine bin Ali was overthrown, and the so-called Jasmine Revolution succeeded in its goal to end his rule. He was the first in a series of leaders to fall to popular revolt. Egypt and Libya soon followed as Mubarak and Gaddafi fell in quick succession. It would signal the beginning of the Arab Spring, a movement that would change the history of the Middle East forever. But now, 5 years on, Syria is devastated by a full-scale war, Libya in turmoil, and many are left questioning Egypt's democratic methods. Tunisia has been held up as the success story of those revolutions. But half a decade later, as the country celebrates the fall of Ben Ali, many Tunisians are saying they were better off under the former dictator. Today's newsmaker is the Tunisian Revolution, as we ask if the country can be held up as the darling of the Arab Spring.
It was a revolution against repression. Protests inspired by an act of desperation. 5 years ago, the regime of Tunisian President Zine el-Abidine Ben Ali came to an end, setting off a chain reaction across the Arab world.
Many things have not come about as I would have wished, to be honest, in particular regarding democracy and rights.
The demands for political change spread to Egypt, to Libya, and to Syria and other countries. Some had revolutions. Others descended into civil war. Tunisia, though, has largely been stable, although recent terror attacks have threatened the peace. Criticism of the Tunisian government being broadcast openly and without fear. This band are performing on the radio, singing that people are still crying after the revolution. 5 years ago, a public performance like this in Tunisia would have been unthinkable. But the media has now opened up, no longer repressed by a dictator.
When Ben Ali is in power, we haven't the power.
When we sang before, there were a lot of problems and taboos. But after the revolution, we found freedom of speech so we can express ourselves. We talk about everything we want.
Under the former president, Zine el-Abidine Ben Ali, free speech didn't exist. He ruled Tunisia for 23 years through repression and fear. But in December 2010, Tunisians demanded change after this man, Mohamed Bouazizi, killed himself. His cousin shows me a poster of Mohamed. The vegetable seller set himself on fire in frustration. That led to huge protests and Ben Ali fled the country. But Mohamed's cousin doesn't believe enough has changed.
The people regret the revolution because, even more than before, the dictator is back. This government uses terrorism. Every time we ask for some rights, they say they must fight against terrorism first.
The terror threat is real and seemingly growing. In November, a suicide bomber targeted the presidential guard, killing 12 people. It came after Tunisia's worst terror attack, 38 people gunned down in the resort of Sousse in June 2015. That March, another 21 people were killed in Tunis. The targets of both of those attacks, foreign tourists. The government is battling to convince foreigners that the country is safe.
La priorité des priorités, c'est la sécurité maintenant.
The number one priority of our government is security. Social peace is also important because it's essential to restarting the economy, also to relaunching the tourist sector.
Le tourisme, qui est un secteur important de notre économie.
As Tunisians celebrate 5 years since the revolution, some are also protesting, calling for justice and more jobs. It's a sign of frustration with the revolution, but also the change in this country. This demonstration is an example of why so many view Tunisia as the success story of the Arab Spring. Yes, some here are disillusioned with the amount of progress since the revolution, but in comparison to many other countries in the region, they now have the right to freely protest. Still, some feel the country's not moving forward fast enough. The media may be freer than ever before, but freedom from danger and poverty look like battles far from won. Duncan Crawford, The Newsmakers, Tunis.
Well, to discuss the effects of the Jasmine Revolution 5 years after the fall of Ben Ali in Paris is Monsef Sheikh. He's an economist and former MP for Tunisia's Democratic Alliance Party. And in Tunis, I'm joined by Radwan Masmoudi. He's the founder and president of the Center of the Study of Islam and Democracy, and Lina bin Mhenni, a Tunisian activist and teacher at Tunisian University. Thanks, all of you, for joining us. Lina bin Mhenni, let's start with you. 5 years on, Ben Ali is gone. Are there way too many signs that Ben Ali's Tunisia didn't go away fully?
Yes, it's too sad to say it, but I don't think that we've really got rid of the system of Ben Ali. It's true that Ben Ali is gone from Tunisia, but the whole system is still in place. When it comes to the claims of the people who took to the streets in December 2010 and January 2011, they were ignored by the different governments that succeeded to that of Ben Ali. As I said, the whole system is still here. Corruption, nepotism, and all the other problems, including the violence of the police, repression, are still present in Tunisia.
Monsef Sheikh, is the corruption that might have driven Bouazizi to set himself ablaze still very much the same?
Yeah. Well, what has driven him is corruption, and corruption has been making the Tunisian poor poorer, the Tunisian rich richer, and the regions where Bouazizi belonged to were not taken care of. So since that time, we have built democracy in Tunisia. We have a new constitution that is very progressive, but on the other hand, we are electing democratically governments that are not efficient in terms of addressing the regional development and the wealth creation in Tunisia. This year, growth, that means wealth creation in the country, will be zero, and this is a very, very bad blunder of the democratically elected governments that should work more and talk less about ideology.
Okay, let's ask Radwan Masmoudi. It's the politicians who have messed it up, isn't it? In principle, Tunisia is a nice country. The constitution's a good one. Why aren't they implementing it properly?
Well, I mean, I think that, first of all, we have a lot to celebrate in Tunisia today. There are lots of celebrations. I think that we have a democracy in Tunisia today, and it is a functioning democracy. However, to get rid of the corruption, for example, is not easy. It takes a long time because a lot of laws have to be changed, not just the constitution, but many, many laws have to be changed. The administration has to be changed. The culture of the people themselves has to be changed, because corruption has been so widespread among the Tunisians, among the people. They have become used to paying bribes and things like that. And there are many problems in the system, in the administration, where police officers or customs or different people in the administration have become used to taking bribes.
Some people have said Tunisia has become a Daesh factory. It's producing so many ISIS fighters. Amnesty International used the anniversary to highlight new evidence of torture that Lina brought up and the deaths of detainees in prison, at least 6 since 2011. People have been jailed for homosexuality. They've been jailed for protesting. So I ask you the question, it's January 2016. With all of that in mind, in addition to the corruption, is your country a free country?
I think there is no question that Tunisia today is a free country. It has been ranked as free by not only Freedom House, but so many other international organizations. It doesn't mean there are no abuses. Sometimes there are abuses in any countries. I mean, the United States had Guantanamo Bay and had torture in Iraq.
Let's not talk about the United States. Let's talk about Tunisia. Come on.
About?
Let's talk about Tunisia, not the United States.
No, I'm saying that there are exceptions, that unfortunately, there is still sometimes mistreatment or torture or things like that. But these are isolated cases, and they are not systematic. And the police officers who are accused of these crimes are immediately stopped and arrested and investigated. We had 4 investigations by the members of parliament who went to these police stations immediately, like the next day, to investigate these alleged torture cases.
Let's get Lina to,
So
let's see if Lina is satisfied with that. Sorry to interrupt you again, because we don't have too much time. Lina, are you satisfied with that?
I'm sorry, I'm not living in the US. I'm not talking about the US. I'm talking about Tunisia. I'm an activist. I'm working on the ground. I'm receiving many messages every day from people who have been abused by the police or other forces. The cases of torture are higher than the 2 last years. Yeah, it's good to talk about a new constitution that is more or less a progressive one. It's good to have this as an ink on paper, but there is no concretization of this constitution. Well, I think that we have to listen to people every day, to be in touch with them, to understand what's going on in Tunisia. I don't think that we are really into a democracy. Yeah, it's true that we have so many political parties. It's true that, as I said, there is a constitution. It's true that we had fair elections and the government had been electing democratically, but the situation for people, I mean, the daily life is very difficult for people. The abuses are no exceptions, and I will give a good proof. Every day we have the media talking about the equation. You have to choose between security, stability, and between human rights and freedoms. Politicians are working on this. Policemen, trade unions are working on this, and the media is working on that.
Okay, so let's pose that to Monsef Shefrour.
Trying to take our freedoms. We are not in a democracy. I'm sorry.
Let me pose that to Monsef. Monsef, is that the false choice that Tunisians are given, freedom or security?
Well, listen, I would like it to be very clear that Tunisia today is much better than Tunisia 5 years ago. Let's not give the impression that Tunisia is going back. Why? Because 5 years ago, we had the impression of stability under dictatorship and under corruption. And today, we have a system that is really democratic. We are in the process of building the second stage of the rocket democracy. On the one hand, this will allow Tunisians to select the right government. Unfortunately, up to now, we have voted to select governments that distributed seats and without having a program, without having dates, without having objectives that they share with the electorate. And therefore, now what is missing is to see governments that come not only to sit on seats and have ministries, but would come to say, well, this is what we want to achieve next month, next 6 months, next year, in terms of job development, in terms of remote areas development, and we have the potential to do that. We have the people to do that. So everybody is doing politics. No one is doing economics. No one is doing planning. No one is doing investment.
Yeah, strongly put, pragmatic and practical solutions. Radwan Masmoudi, many people talk about Tunisia as a model of success for the Arab Spring, but usually when they compare it to Libya, when they compare it to Syria, And the response to that quite often is, come on, any country looks good compared to Libya right now or compared to Syria right now. Do you find that that example of your country as a model has become almost a burden that you don't want to carry?
In Tunisia itself, we don't really speak about that comparison. We don't want to compare ourselves to any other country. We compare ourselves to the potential that we have in Tunisia. And I think I agree in a way with what Professor Monsaf said, that on the political track, I think we made a lot of progress. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but we made a lot of progress. And I think we are close to being a free and a truly democratic country. However, on the economic front, I agree completely that there has not been any change or any improvement in the economy. In fact, you could say that the economy has gotten worse, which is very frustrated, and they say we have not seen any improvement in the last 5 years.
Okay,
and so
we are running out of time.
I agree that there is still a lot.
Yes, Radwan, sorry, we're running out of time. I'm going to give Lina 15 to 20 seconds, if possible, please, because we're out of time. Lina, final word from you.
Yeah, well, I'm happy that Ben Ali is gone, but I think that the road is too long. Although I'm not optimistic right now, but I'm still hopeful for my country because there are young people who are really trying to change what is going on in Tunisia. I think that the majority of politicians betrayed the young generation who took to the street, who tried to change the situation. But as I said, I'm hopeful because this young generation is still fighting.
Lina Ben Mahenni, Munsif Shekrouhu, and Radwan Masmoudi, thank you very much for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, nearly set in stone is the final step for the Iran nuclear deal about to be completed. And in picture this, deadly attacks take hold of Indonesia's capital, Jakarta. The final step of Iran's nuclear deal with world powers could be imminent. On Friday, the IAEA is expected to reveal whether Iran has fulfilled its obligations under the agreement. If that is the case, implementation day could be just around the corner, paving the way for sanctions to end. The Newsmakers' Ashraf Helmi has more.
Iran detained these US sailors after they entered its waters. The US apologized and they were later released. But despite the incident, relations have not been affected. Both the US and the EU are preparing to lift sanctions on Tehran this weekend in what is being called Implementation Day, and everyone is hoping for smooth sailing.
I also want to thank the Iranian authorities for their cooperation and quick response. These are always situations which, as everybody here knows, have an ability, if not properly guided, to get out of control.
The Obama administration worked hard last year to convince lawmakers in the Senate to back a nuclear deal with Tehran. It was perhaps the greatest foreign policy victory for the president. He was careful not to talk about Iran in his State of the Union address, to the frustration of Republicans.
They wanted the president to say more on Iran. They wanted the president to say more about his foreign policy decisions. But he left that out, and I think there was a criticism for leaving it out, but at the same time, it didn't give them real bait to go after the president.
President Hassan Rouhani has himself come up against hardliners back home. Years of distrust in Tehran over US intentions has made it difficult to get agreement in parliament. But the success of the deal is partly due to the personal relationship between John Kerry and Mohammad Zarif. The two foreign ministers have reportedly warmed to each other after years of sitting at the negotiating table together. In return for the gradual lifting of sanctions, Tehran will reduce its uranium stockpile to below 300 kilograms. It'll also cut its uranium-enriched centrifuges to just over 6,000 from 19,000 at its Fordo and Natanz enrichment sites. And it will instead ship its uranium to Russia to be processed. If the deal goes ahead as expected, about $30 billion of Iran's estimated $100 billion in frozen assets are expected to be released straight away. But there's a thorn in Iran's side, its regional rival, Saudi Arabia. It's flooding the oil markets, producing in excess of 10 million barrels a day. And if Iran enters the market, it'll have to deal with oversupply. The US will have to play a delicate balancing act in a Middle East beset by sectarian differences. For now, though, both Washington and Tehran are cautiously optimistic there'll be an announcement this weekend. It will turn the most heavily sanctioned country in the world into one of the most watched. Ashraf Helmi, The Newsmakers.
Let's speak now to Paul Ingram. He's the Executive Director of the British American Security Information Council and an expert on global nuclear disarmament strategies. Thanks a lot for joining us. So just before this announcement, we've had that incident with the sailors. The Hawks say, even though the sailors were eventually released, they say the detention of the sailors was an example of Obama's capitulation to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran deal supporters say, see, this is how mature diplomacy works. You say sorry and no harm done. Who's right?
Well, we have to answer that question, we have to go beyond just the statements to the attitudes that underlie them. I think it's quite clear that from a US Hawks perspective, the Republican candidates who've leapt in on this issue, to them, this is a situation where US sailors have been captured and then released, and that itself is an outrageous act by the Iranians. Anything that limits the power of the hegemon in the region should be seen as an act of aggression. Of course, from the perspective of pretty much any other country on the planet, we live in an international system of sovereign states, and the Americans the American sailors, by agreement of both countries, did go into the sovereign waters of Iran. We can soon see that the Iranian action of releasing sailors very quickly demonstrates a move of goodwill on the one hand, and secondly, a commitment to seeing the nuclear deal completed and implementation day declared later on this week.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. Now let's just look a bit broader. Since the deal was announced, Syria continued to burn. Iran, for its part, supporting Bashar al-Assad. You have the renewed or intensified Saudi-Iran tensions. They're basically at war with each other in some proxy ways in Yemen. You had the Iranians burning US flags and chanting death to America when they were attacking the Saudi embassy. Does the deal in any way have the potential for unraveling because of everything else that's happening around the deal?
Oh, it absolutely does have the potential to unravel, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that things are all rosy. But American flags have been burnt on the streets of Tehran for the last 35 years. That is not a new incident. What is new is what you point to around Saudi reactions, which are in large part motivated not only by the conflicts in Syria and Yemen, which, well, certainly the Syrian conflict is not new. The Yemeni conflict has got worse in the last few months, but is motivated as well by the Iran deal itself.
Paul Ingram, we have run out of time, but thank you very much for your thoughts. In today's Picture This, at least 7 people have been killed in the Indonesian capital, Jakarta. Police say there were a series of explosions and a barrage of gunfire by militants in the city centre. Daesh has now claimed responsibility for the assault. Take a look at how the attacks panned out. Today's newsmaker has been Tunisia's revolution. 5 years on, the country is held up as the Arab Spring's success story, where hopes of a democratic future remain strong. But beneath today's celebrations on the streets of Tunis lies perhaps a different truth. Tunisia is reportedly the world's largest exporter of Daesh fighters. Attacks at home have destroyed the country's tourism industry and left the country under a state of emergency. Now a contracting economy and high unemployment are prompting many to ask if life was better before the revolution, and some are even calling for Ben Ali to be reinstated. Tunisia's Jasmine Revolution may have brought about a delicate democracy, but many challenges still lie on the road ahead. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Gaddafi. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.